As we navigate this crazy world, we must search for the truth. Then we can discover and empower ourselves to live as a free individual. Join Tami on Journey for Truth.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Journey for Truth is on a mission to always be exploring the truth, asking different questions, finding the sometimes difficult answers. This week I have invited two ladies to join me. They are a very important part of my book, Silent Whispers, What One Thinks is Crazy, and Silent Whispers, The Power Within. Now, Silent Whispers is nonfiction, and it is, as I just said, in two parts, two books. In these books, the reader is taken on a journey to really explore different elements of society that is hidden away from the public eye. Now, anyone can read about MK Ultra, the CIA, the different human experiments that have occurred on children and adults, but these two books primarily focus on the human experimentations that occurred on children. As a medium, many of these children began visiting me and talking about what occurred to them, when it occurred, how, and that's when I began writing the book. Now, Tina and Andrea began joining me on different trips. We went together to explore different parts of the United States to assist children who were really stuck in their reality, their continued tortured experience. And without Tina and Andrea, I would not have gone on the trips, and there would not have been a whole lot to write about in Silent Whispers. So I'm very excited to introduce them. Ladies, welcome.
Hi.
So introduce yourself real quick so the listeners and the viewers know who's Andrea, who's Tina.
I'm Andrea McDonald. I live in New York, just outside of New York City. And until recently, I was in the advertising business.
And I'm Tina Herring, and I'm actually Tami's aunt, but I'm only 3 years older.
Well,
and I am a college professor out in Denver, Colorado.
Well, thank you both for joining me. So first question, what was your initial reaction when I reached out to you to join me on our very first trip to Montauk, which is in Long Island? Andrea, let's start with you because you live on Long Island.
Sure. I do live on Long Island, and we refer to Montauk as the end because it's the actual end of Long Island, the tip, the easternmost tip. And I only knew of Montauk from when I was little. My dad was a fisherman, and we used to go to Montauk to go fishing. And until you had mentioned the trip, I really hadn't spent a ton of time out there. It's kind of a beach community on the end of the Hamptons. And I was so excited and intrigued and curious about what this was going to be about, and certainly excited that you guys were going to be coming to New York.
And what about you, Tina? What was your initial reaction?
It was bad, actually. It was well, it was unusual because I was like, all right, so we're gonna go to New York and poke around at Camp Hero or whatever. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what this was going to evolve into, but it looked just like a simple trip to New York with you two ladies. And I don't know why I felt the way I did, but I just felt like, oh, this is such bad news. I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe the plane's gonna crash or something. I originally had bought my tickets, and then I canceled them the very next day. And then, I mean, obviously, I bought a second set of tickets, much more expensive, and then finally made it out there. So.
Yeah, my initial reaction when I found out we were going to be going out there, I was a little scared, and I didn't know what to expect. I don't think any of us knew what to expect at all, and this was so brand new. And the only thing I thought we might encounter was crazy. And we did encounter a little bit of crazy. But it was a fantastic trip that really took us on a momentum to our next trip. What was our next trip? It was New Mexico, right?
Yep, Dulce and Los Alamos.
A second trip with Albuquerque?
Or Dulce, yeah.
Oh, no, Dulce, yes, yes.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting experience. Did you, Andrea, you mentioned that you were excited about it. Did you have any fear going into this?
Well, after the first trip, I think we all had a better idea of what was going to be occurring, and it certainly was unique and definitely, something that I was not used to engaging in. I had not really seen or interacted a lot with non-physicals, and it was very new and different for me. I think Dulce and Los Alamos were really interesting. We had more bad weather after the snow in Montauk. We had terrible rain out there. But I think those two visits started for me to help me kind of understand some of the other things that were at play, like when we went onto the base and people were stopping us at the gate, and I think it started to formulate more in my mind some of the challenges that we might be having even just in the physical world and the places that we were visiting.
Yes, absolutely. And Tina, how much fear did you feel in any of the experiences, really, not just necessarily the first or second?
I think, I've been reflecting on that since I read your questions, and it after the initial fear that I had just getting to Montauk, getting to New York, and then getting a clear idea of exactly what we were doing and what that was going to look like. I mean, obviously I did have fear come up. It sort of ebbed and flowed depending on the situation. But once I got the momentum, and especially, I think about the third trip or around Albuquerque, I think I got a new focus in terms of in terms of my goal and what I wanted to achieve. And so I realized that there was a lot less fear.
I remember our trip to Camp Hero, and Camp Hero is creepy.
It was.
And Camp Hero is really creepy in the winter because there's not many people around. I imagine in summer it feels very different.
Plus the giant snowstorm we drove out there in.
Yes. We had a nasty snowstorm to drive through. It was like 2 hours from your house. And it was pretty creepy, and being out there exploring by ourselves and feeling all this different energy around. And I know, Tina, you had felt different spurts of energy. Or
it was like a scene out of the Blair Witch Project. I mean, it was like total East Coast wilderness, and it was like it was freaky. It was yeah.
We had the opportunity, the great opportunity to meet one of the employees who works at Camp Hero, one of the ground workers there, and he shared with us some information that I wrote about in the book. But it was great to get a different perspective, and he was so down to earth. He was very upfront about, I don't know what's real, I don't know what's not real, but here's my experience. So I thought that was really cool. And then that happened again in Albuquerque too. We met he told us anyway that he was a former employee of the lab in Los Alamos.
Uber driver, was that
the taxi
Uber
driver? Yeah.
Taxi driver, Los Alamos, the lab out there. And he had great information to share in a very short period of time. So when the children were telling me about the torture and the experience that occurred by government officials, and I repeated everything out loud, of course, to you both, and then for the recorder, I wanted to record everything so I could go back home and type it verbatim. What were any feelings you were having as you were hearing about these children's tortured experiences?
Well, initially, really horror. It was horrifying to hear what occurred in those experiments. And then it was compassion. I think I could feel my heart, grow and feel such compassion. And we always ended up, crying, listening to these horrible stories. And it was really, and then the compassion coming to be able to comfort and help guide and assist them. It was really a lot of very extreme feelings always going on at the same time.
And Tina?
I would say the same. I mean, it was shock and horror, and then compassion and love.
Yes, exactly. When I first started hearing about these tortured experiences, I had a lot of doubt around it, because I thought, who would do this? Who would hurt these children like this and do these horrific things? And in fact, I thought to myself, Tami, you've been just watching too many movies. But I confirmed everything and just came to understand and to know that what they were expressing was real and absolutely horrific. And as you both know, it just continued from there. We had some that were not quite as bad, and then we had some kids, it was, you couldn't even make a movie about it. It was so horrific. Did you begin having any doubts as to whether to continue the trips?
I never had any doubts. I felt these trips, I was always excited and looking forward to our trips. And while we certainly had so many different types of challenges along the way, I felt these were, for us, wonderful opportunities to assist, and also just great adventures as people together. I never had any doubts about these trips. There were doubts about things, I think, that went on some of them, but never ever a doubt about the trips for me.
I didn't experience a huge amount of doubt. I mean, again, it just sort of depends on how much influence I allowed in to how much doubt. Yeah, like I said, once we got started, and once I started having that focal point of what my goal was for doing this, that helped a lot in terms of fear and doubt.
When it first began, there was a great excitement. There was some trepidation and of course, not knowing what was going to occur. And so, but there was a lot of excitement, because this was truly an adventure of unknown outcomes. And that was definitely there. And as that momentum grew, that excitement stayed, but there was definitely some times through our later trips where I began to doubt, how long are we going to be doing this? And why are we doing this? And, just a lot of questions that would circulate through my mind. I definitely had the thoughts about quitting, because for all of us, there was time involved, expenses involved. We had great fun. We had great food. We had
Lots of laughs.
There were other things involved. There was sometimes plane trips and lodging, of course, and sometimes rental cars. But it was always worth it. In the end, when we came back, it was always worth it.
That's how I felt.
Always.
Now, you both know, and anyone who's read Silent Whispers knows, that we began receiving visits from government. Anyone can go to the CIA's website, and they still have on their information, online information, remote viewing, and how they had trained different people decades ago to do remote viewing. Now, I don't believe that it ever stopped, but they say it did, but they also said MK Ultra stopped. So I don't tend to believe it, but the information's out there. Now, remote viewing is when the person involved in government, will project their mental body, for a simpler term, in order to view what is occurring and communicate, in this case, us. So when that first happened, when we had a government official doing remote viewing to come in and threaten us, essentially, what were some thoughts you may have been having?
I think the disbelief again, kind of, could this be really happening? Because it sounds so crazy, but it was happening. And I think there were some thoughts like, well, Tami, you were always communicating with them, and I think that you made it very clear that we were not afraid. And they were different. Some seemed so sinister, but some were almost comical because they were so kind of goofy. So it just I don't remember ever feeling any fear, but it was interesting and maybe a little bit concerning as to how that would extend beyond those visits into life once we got back home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same thing. It was entertaining during the trips, but then you think, okay, what's going to happen once I get home? And how far are they going to push this? Because they would threaten us, and be like, you will stop this or else there will be consequences. And like you, Tami, I've watched a lot of sci-fi movies, and I've seen some of those consequences. Not to mention, I mean, all the stories we heard about the children. I mean, if these people can do that to these children, the thought did cross my mind: what could they do to me? What could they do to my family? That's when the fear would creep in, and then I would have to redirect. But yeah, it was definitely something worth thinking about.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was a thing until mental body projections, remote viewing. I had heard the term. There's actually a fictional movie on it, semi-fictional movie on it, that kind of makes fun of it. But I hadn't really thought of it. I certainly hadn't studied it. And I happened to have taken some pictures on our trips. I can't remember which one, but it was very early on. I took some pictures and I had sent them to Haska Harrison, who will also be on this on Journey for Truth at a later date. But I had sent those pictures to him, and he's the one who pointed out there was a mental body projection, a remote viewer in the picture. And then I started gaining more information, but that individual did not come talk to us. I saw him standing there in a very angry and threatening way, but facing one of the teenage girls we were trying to help cross over. I thought he was a deceased person. I had no idea he was still fully alive and just projecting himself. So that's really where the information started building. And then they started coming to visit us and threatening, but they never physically touched us. But you remember in Albuquerque when they came in our room when we were there?
Yes.
So somebody came into our room. Yes.
That was.
I had later confirmed it with Jonah.
Yeah.
That it was the government coming in. They weren't coming in to hurt us. They were coming in to send a message.
Yep, we got it.
We were just taking a nap. We were just laying there taking a nap. And this sounds like a woman in heels is, stomping around the dining room. All our purses are sitting right there. I thought it was you, Andrea.
And I thought it was you.
Why is Andrea stomping around? And then I realized, oh, Andrea's asleep. It was not her.
Yeah, that was interesting. sometimes too, like on Mount Shasta, when we saw that figure, we thought that was a figure in the trees. We're off the beaten path. We're on a mountain somewhere. We're not on the road, and it's kind of like, wow, well, what could happen out here? No one even knows that we're there. I think that was a moment that it was like, we're sort of, look where we are. you know, anything could happen, I guess. But I hadn't been thinking about it until then.
Yeah, I believe it was Mount Shasta. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we had to drive up the, we kept driving up an elevation. It was a one main road. We kept driving up an elevation, and we were trying to find a trailhead, any trailhead that we could begin walking down to find kids, because we never knew where the kids were going. We knew the location, right? We knew, okay, we knew we need to go to Los Alamos, or we need to go to Albuquerque, or wherever else we went. But other than that, we didn't have much clue as to where to start looking and walking around and investigating.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to find that trailhead. And Tina, you had went to the bathroom, and Andrea,
Probably.
and Andrea, you were, I think, standing there waiting to also use the bathroom. And I'm standing at my car, and I see this man walking down.
Right.
He looked so scary. The look on his face reminded me of someone who just murdered another person and finished burying their body. And he was so stiff and angry looking. And I actually felt frightened. That was the first time I felt frightened, just because of the energy that he carried. And there wasn't much around us, so I didn't include it in the book. But that was one of the very few times that I was scared, up until our very last trip. It was all great fun, though. In the end, it was all great fun.
Interesting moments for sure.
Do either of you have a favorite place that you will just loved visiting?
I enjoyed our trip. I enjoyed Mount Blanca, and I enjoyed Lander. I think Lander, Wyoming. Those were my two favorites, I think. So much happened. There was so many things going on, and so many new, kind of discoveries and experiences on both of those trips. I think they were both my favorite.
And Tina?
Well, I mean, it in terms of place, like in terms of, we had a lot of fun when we went to Mount Shasta.
Mm-hmm.
I always enjoy going to California, and I enjoy Wyoming. But I mean, in terms of adventures, Mount Blanca and Albuquerque was pretty adventurous.
I thought Canyonlands was your favorite.
Which one?
Canyonlands.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, I need to add Canyonland to that. I love Canyonlands, but for the life of me, I can't remember anything that happened. But yes, I love Canyonlands. That was beautiful.
Canyonlands was very large. That is such a huge area. I have no idea how many square miles it covers, but it's huge. It's kind of amazing that we encountered any children there.
We didn't encounter a lot. I think it was only 2 or 3.
I think it was more. We usually averaged around 10 total by the time we were done. But yeah, we definitely had to do some more searching in Canyonlands because it was just so expansive. So by the end of our trips, by the end, but also kind of in the middle, around the time I think we went to Albuquerque, actually, we began having a variety of extraterrestrial experiences. It started with me, I think. But do you two want to talk about any experiences that you began having with extraterrestrials, not necessarily limited to Albuquerque, but anytime during the course of our trips?
Well, really, I mean, there could have been ET activity in and around my house, but I was never fully aware of it, if there was, until after our trip to Las Vegas. And then I think we were all very fully aware of what happened. So, first it was Andrea who had an experience in Las Vegas, and I'll let her share that one. But then literally 2 days later, you went home first, and you had an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew I was next. And so I was just waiting for my turn. And like clockwork, 2 days later, I did have an experience in which, I mean, for all three of us, they did, they did choke Andrea, and then they tried to choke you, didn't they? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then, and it was like, I don't know what it was with the choking, but they attempted to choke me as well. But I think it's because I was on such pins and needles now, because I knew I was next, that I wasn't fully asleep. And so as soon as I started to feel the static electricity in the room, and then I started feeling these like pins and needles around my neck, I immediately jumped up and out of bed. So I mean, I don't know why I wasn't paralyzed. I mean, I'm very thankful that I wasn't. So it wasn't nearly as bad for me as it was for you two. But that was my definite, which is surprising though, the however many years, 5 years we did this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And not to say I didn't have other experiences, I'm just not consciously aware of the other experiences. But I thought that was pretty good. That those were good odds.
Yes, you didn't have something stronger than that is good, is what you mean. Yeah. Andrea, do you want to describe what happened to you in Las Vegas?
Sure. Yeah. I was going to mention what a nice time we had in Vegas, actually, just as in terms of one of our visits. But that was definitely creepy in the hotel. I was asleep and woke up and I couldn't move. And then I felt something come around my neck and squeeze on my neck. And I kind of jumped up into bed. And was okay. I was breathing hard because it was scary, but I remember looking back and wondering if I was having a dream. And I remember looking back at you guys in the room and really clearly seeing all of the details of the room, even to where your blankets were and socks on the floor, and realized in the morning that was a real experience and not just a dream. Which was frightening.
Yes, it is frightening. And the experience I had was before we went to Albuquerque, I believe. And that night, talk about fear. Question at the beginning around the fear. I definitely had different fearful experiences, but they weren't usually on the trips themselves. They were usually kind of in between trips. And in this, it was such a strange energy in the room. It was middle of the night. My husband's sleeping next to me. And all of a sudden, I knew in an instant what was about to happen. And then in that moment, I was paralyzed. And I believe, laying on my back, looking straight up, but my eyes are open, but I can't move anything. Actually, no, I was looking towards the wall, because then I noticed already that there was a gray alien standing there staring at me. Now, this particular gray alien had red eyes, and I wasn't too familiar with different grays. We all know vaguely what they look like, the shape of their head and the shape of their body, but I can't say that I ever studied them or research the different types of grays. And, he's just standing there staring at me while I'm paralyzed. I would say that was the most fearful experience I've ever had. And it happened a couple more times at least, but it stopped, thankfully. And it's never resumed. Knock on wood, it's never resumed. But I guess it was just a side effect of going on our trips, right?
I mean, considering how bad it could have been, I mean, that, of course, I would have melted into a pile of goo had I woken up one night and saw, a gray standing beside my bed. I can't imagine. So, better you than me.
Thank you. Now, someone might be thinking, a listener or a viewer might be thinking, how did it go from government, CIA, human experiments to aliens? And in what all three of us began learning is that it wasn't just the government torturing children, it was also extraterrestrials abducting and torturing children, obviously others as well, the adults, but mostly actually just about all of the ones that we assisted were either younger children or teenagers, and really evolved into that as well. I think that surprised me a little bit. Did that surprise either one of you, that it evolved from CIA and government into extraterrestrials?
I don't think I was surprised by that. I think it kind of changed the game a little bit and upped the game a little bit from what we were used to experiencing, and definitely, when we saw the hybrid children in, I think it was in Lander, that was really kind of stunning to think about really what we were how we were interacting and who we were interacting with.
Yes, by Lander, we had really come a long way from working with some kids who are abducted to hybrid children.
Yep.
Yeah. What about you, Tina? Were you surprised at all that it evolved into that direction?
No. Once I realized the trips and the purpose of the trip, soon after Montauk, I started doing my own research, and I think we all were, reading these similar stories, like, what do they call it? The Montauk
Project.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started reading that. I started listening to interviews, and there was some mention of working with alien races. And Jonah had mentioned that our government had been working with alien races. So I guess with that background knowledge, it just didn't surprise me that much. That, and I'm a really big sci-fi nerd, and so of course, what our government's working.
Of course,
with.
they're
Yeah, I mean, hell, haven't you seen X-Files? The whole purpose of X-Files is to uncover the truth.
This is true, and I was a big fan of X-Files back in the 90s. So apparently I'm the only one who was surprised at that's not the first time I've been surprised by certain things. Both of you are like, yeah, I knew. I saw it coming. I'm like, what? Now, had either of you experienced extraterrestrial or similar activities prior to our trips?
I had an experience several years before we began our trips at my former home, and had woken up in the middle of the night I heard humming and went downstairs, and the walls were shaking. The literal walls of the house were shaking, and I was shouting, for my husband at the time, and he said he didn't hear anything, and expressed that there was nothing going on, but it was clearly shaking. And when I had asked our teacher Jonah about it, he said they were ETs and that they would be back, and that I had nothing to fear. And when I moved into my current home, the first night that I was here, the same thing occurred. The walls were shaking, and steps around the perimeter of the floor. And the second time I was much less frightened than I was the first time. But yeah, those were the experiences that I had had.
Wow.
I didn't interact with them. I didn't really understand what was happening, but they had visited for sure.
What about you, Tina?
Not consciously. I mean, there is a lot of the males in my family. Our family for several generations back have been abducted. My father was often abducted. So and Jonah did tell me that I had witnessed that as a young child, but I have no memory.
I don't remember having any, I think. I don't think I had really any extraterrestrial activity or experiences on a conscious level anyway, prior to our trips. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it took me by surprise, because it seemed like, it went from 0 to 60, from not much going on to now I'm being paralyzed and being stared at by a gray. So that's great information. A lot of people have had different experiences and they don't know how to explain it. They don't know how to make sense of it. And sometimes, they just need to read about someone else's experience or hear about someone else's experience to begin making those connections that something did happen. And sometimes a person needs to become more aware of that in order to address it. Now, when you mentioned earlier, Andrea and Tina, Mount Blanca. Now, we were guided to go to Mount Blanca. We were not told why. We were not told what to expect. I know for me, I just assumed we would be assisting children since it was the 3 of us going. So that was the expectation I went with. But that didn't exactly happen. What were your thoughts on Mount Blanca?
I think even though we didn't encounter any children, Mount Blanca was probably the craziest of our trips.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, Mount Blanca was a huge, I'm trying to think of something that's not a swear word. So, it was a cluster, what. I mean, but it was truly one of the more exciting trips. And I don't regret any of it. But that's when we first encountered the female ETs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And and again, it was like close encounters of the third kind, and I didn't even know. And I very first, I don't know, what was it? Okay, I think I directed you and Andrea out to a field to go and look at something, but I had to take stickers out of my socks. So I was in the car taking stickers out of my socks. And I guess while I was in the car, they were putting symbols on your car. And I had no idea until we all, you guys came back and you're like, what's that?
Yeah.
And you were asking me Tina, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? And I'm like, no. No.
I know, I wanted to scream, how could you not see anything? You were right there in the car. Yeah, that was a little crazy. And it wasn't just that; it was getting locked out at what was 11 p.m. I think at night, and getting locked out. When I know we didn't lock that door because
No,
it was
we didn't.
a hard lock to turn. It was an old door. It was difficult. You had to put effort into locking the door, and obviously we're not going to lock ourselves out on purpose. But because we got locked out and we had to go through this whole charade to get back in, it made us get to the cemetery later.
Yep.
Remember how hot it was? It was like 80, 90 degrees.
Yeah,
At
it was
least,
hot.
yes.
And we
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we were planning on going to the cemetery earlier that day, but instead we went later. And because we went later, I mean, so to give some background, maybe some people that didn't read the book, we wanted to go to, what was her name? Nellie?
Lewis, I think was her last name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She had a grave up there in Mount Blanca area. It was a small little cemetery.
Yep.
Definitely very rural. And I remember walking around. We found her grave, and then we were just kind of walking around, and this car pulls up with this elderly man and this middle-aged couple. And the first thing the elderly man does is come up to us and it's like, "Who are you here for?" And I almost said, "Nellie." And I'm like, what would he know, you know?
Yeah.
And instead, I stopped myself and I said, "Oh, we would, we thought this was a cute, quaint graveyard." And we decided
like that
to
sort
just,
of thing.
take a look at this, see if there's any old gravestones, And then come to find out, he was her brother.
Yes.
So, yeah, that was. And then you started asking him a whole bunch of questions, and I don't know if you want to you want to talk about that.
Well, it's written down that she took her own life by suicide, and after a whole list of experiences occurred, including her horse. And anyone can Google her name, they can Google her horse. The information's online. It was a very, very odd experience. I think it happened in the late 60s. And I think she died in the early 70s. Anyone can look that up to find the actual dates. But yeah, it's said that she took her own life, and I didn't believe it.
Right in front of the graveyard, right in front of the cemetery.
Exactly. And based on previous information, I didn't believe it. And when I asked her brother if he thought she had took her own life, if he thought that was true, I got the shutdown by his daughter, who was standing right next to him mostly.
And basically led him away after you asked that.
Exactly, Andrea, exactly. She really shut it down and then took him away, which I understand. She didn't want her father upset. He was definitely up there in age. But, I was wondering, so what was the point of that? And my only thought was, well, we must have needed to connect some sort of energy. It was Nellie who actually was writing about the female ETs in a journal that was stolen, in a journal that Hoska Harrison, my father, actually read because he had seen the journal in person back in the 80s or late 80s or 90s. I have to go back and look at the year, but he actually saw the journal before it was stolen. And she was writing about these female ETs. So I think that was the connection we needed to establish. And well, we were right.
I mean, that makes you think, though. I mean,
yeah.
She wrote some newspaper articles in the local newspaper about her experiences with her horse. and how unusual it was. And I can't remember if she talked about UFOs or not, but she definitely hinted to it. And look what happened to her.
Yeah.
It was like, wow. I mean, so it makes you wonder. So why did she get killed? And I mean, the worst experience we've had thus far, hopefully ever, was our experience, our encounters with the influence that we would have, obviously, and then our encounters with the Greys or the aliens.
Right. There was quite a bit of influence projected towards us each time we went on the trip. I think we all felt it to different degrees and at different times. But yeah, it's very interesting information about Nellie. And having completed that trip, we did establish a relationship really with these female ETs that both of you have come to know. And they've communicated beautiful information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people, when they think of extraterrestrials, they think of the Greys, and they think of perhaps other ones who have a harmful intent. But the female ETs want to teach about love. They want to teach about compassion and living your life. So it's been an adventure just talking with them and writing down what they want to share.
Yeah.
And they've spoken to both of you and offered some great information at different
Mm-hmm.
So
That's wonderful.
onward to Nicky Boy. I wrote about Nicky Boy in, both. It was more so in the first book, in the first Silent Whispers. Do you have anything of significance that he told you that really stuck with you?
Well, on our last trip to Sedona, actually, I'm going to let Tina share the story that he shared with us in Sedona. I thought that was really meaningful. But I think Nicky Boy he's been kind of he's popped in and out on our trips, and it's been really, he's almost been like a companion. I find him really to be entertaining, and he comes out with some funny, crazy things that he says along the way. I remember on our first trip to Montauk, he was whistling in the car as we were driving through the snowstorm. I always think of him, I'm so fond of him as kind of, he's kind of our fourth on these trips sometimes. And I think he comes out with some really clever and amusing commentary along the way. But I think one of the most wonderful things that he shared with us was in Sedona, and I'm going to leave that to Tina to share.
I can't remember. Can you give me some hints on that?
He told us the story about the child, and he kind of went through this story about a child who was in the dark and in fear, and that there was compassion and assistance available to the child. And we were laughing because he started it as, there once was a child, and we didn't know what he was going to talk about, but then he spoke about how this child was in the dark and didn't know where to go and was in pain, and that we were able to support and assist them and guide them to the light, and how wonderful that was. And then he ran into my bedroom to chase away a giant gray that was in there.
Yeah. I do remember that. I do remember him saying, I'm going to go check out that guy and see what
what's
he's
that guy doing, make sure he's out of there.
Yeah.
Oh, I actually had forgotten about that story.
Yeah, so have I. Yeah.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
That was a very nice wrap up to that, because Sedona was our last trip. So that was a nice, I remember I was like, blubbering and crying. Just so sweet. The one thing the Nicky Boy had told me that I remember is he said, do not fall down the rabbit hole.
Huh. What do you think he meant by that?
I still don't quite know. Maybe just, don't let my imagination, run wild with, all the things that could possibly happen. But it's something I think about often because, sometimes we can get so wrapped up in our issues that we essentially fall down a rabbit hole, self-created rabbit hole. So I thought that was very good advice.
Yeah, Nick is a very interesting person. He's, if listeners and viewers haven't already determined it, but he's in the non-physical. He's in spirit form, but he dresses like he walked off a movie set from the 1940s, complete with the hat, the tie, the nice shoes. Sometimes he has a cigar. And when I originally met him, he told me that he wanted to help me. And then I was told by Jonah that he is a spiritual broker. I help him, he helps me. So I did help him a few times. He brought friends of his who needed to cross over, but they were so caught up in their injuries and anger, usually, that they didn't see him, but they could see me. And that's how I helped him. And then I came to discover that he was helping us on our trips, kind of behind the scenes. And then, yeah, he showed up in Sedona, which was a wonderful surprise. And Sedona was the only trip we went on where we got a picture of a gray.
Right.
Well, we got a picture of a lot of weird things.
Yes.
Yeah. That was spooky.
It was spooky. The rental car that Andrea got was damaged.
Yep.
Badly.
I wish we'd gotten a picture of that. That was crazy. Well, thank God Andrea has this like membership to Hertz that allows her to bring back cars in all sorts of conditions. We have not been gentle on our rental cars.
No, we haven't.
There's been all sorts of things that happened to them. So.
That was crazy. So first the damage, then the gray that we got a picture of, then that footprint.
Yes.
One singular footprint that looks like a dinosaur footprint. I don't even know.
That was amazing.
It didn't look like a bird, didn't look like any type of mammal. And it was just one foot, one spot. Like it didn't arrive in and it didn't leave. So strange, but there is history around. What was that ranch called? I can't remember off the top.
Bradshaw
Ranch is where all of that weird stuff happened. And there's a lot of information around Bradshaw Ranch. And people can Google that too and find out the history. Someone keeps suggesting that we visit Skinwalker Ranch. It's in Utah. Yes, supposedly there is some major stuff that occurs there. And what I'm told is that there is actually a guard there with a gun. So you can't.
In the physical?
Yeah. You can actually access the ranch, is what I'm told. It's something to look into. Who knows? Who knows when this pandemic is over and
we should go.
never know what could happen in the future. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining me here on Journey for Truth. I hope you enjoyed reminiscing.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful. It was wonderful to reminisce. I loved our trips.
Yes, I did too. And sometimes I feel a little sad that they're over. But, we took so many trips and we experienced so much on each and every trip. Even if we only encountered a handful of kids, we still ended up encountering kids in our hotel room and then sometimes at home after we returned. So even when it seemed like we didn't do a lot, it was still something. It was still an adventure.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we only touched the highlights today in today's show, so people can read the books and get much more detail about the various trips and what happened. But today we talked about stuff that's not in the book either. Well, thank you both for joining me here on Journey for Truth, and thank you listeners for joining us as well. You can listen on Spotify and iHeartRadio, and you can view as well on YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.